3 days without food, and your body makes a decision on its own. It starts eating itself, fat first. Then muscle, including the muscle in your heart if it goes on long enough. That wasn't a worst-case scenario for our ancestors. That was an average winter for most of the last 300,000 years. And when the body runs out of itself to eat, it starts looking outward at things no one would normally call food. No stored grain, no fields, no fridge to raid at midnight. Every single calorie had to be found or taken before something else got to it first. And when nothing could be found, our ancestors didn't just get hungry, they changed into something willing to do things that would horrify the people who did them in any other circumstance. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how far that change went. Today, hunger is measured in hours. Skip breakfast, skip lunch, and by evening you're standing in front of an open fridge. For almost all of human history, there was no fridge, no orchard, no animal waiting behind a fence. If the herd moved, you followed it. If the berries weren't ripe, you waited. If winter came early, you starved. Simple as that. One missed spear throw, one injured hunter, one bad season. That was the entire gap between a full stomach and days of nothing. And the body doesn't wait patiently. After a few days without food, thinking slows. Muscles feel heavier. Even small decisions start to feel exhausting, because the brain itself is running on fumes. The worst part was never the hunger itself. It was not knowing when, or if, it would end. So the question our ancestors woke up to wasn't, what's for breakfast? It was simpler and far more dangerous. What still counts as food? Starvation doesn't arrive all at once. It lowers your standards one decision at a time. First, people just searched harder, walked farther, hunted longer. But every extra mile spent calories that couldn't be replaced, which meant the search itself was a gamble. So the line moved. Rabbits, birds, lizards, frogs, animals barely large enough to feed one person suddenly became worth risking your life for. Then the line moved again, underground and downward to something most people today wouldn't look at twice. Beetles, grubs, termites, fat larvae pulled out of rotting wood. To modern eyes, this looks like desperation. To our ancestors, it was closer to a reliable food source, high in fat and protein, easy to catch, and, unlike a fleeing animal, impossible to outrun. Studies of traditional hunter-gatherer societies still practicing these methods today show insects weren't just emergency food. In many environments, they were a dependable part of the regular diet, not a sign that things had gone wrong yet. But dependable wasn't the same as sufficient. A handful of grubs doesn't feed a family for a week. So the search kept moving, this time into the ground itself. Roots, bulbs, buried tubers, pulled out from beneath frozen soil with bare, cracked hands. Except many of these plants were built to not be eaten. Some were bitter enough to burn the mouth on contact. Others carried toxins strong enough to kill in hours. Eat the wrong root, and starvation might not be what finally ended you. There was no manual for this. Knowledge passed down the only way it could, through trial, sickness, and sometimes death. Every mistake taught the next generation exactly which plant to avoid, at the cost of the person who found out the hard way. Even that knowledge had a ceiling. Eventually, a season came with no insects, no safe roots, no berries, no small animals left to find. Nothing. And that's the point where the story stops being about foraging. When there was truly nothing left to gather, our ancestors turned to something that sounds almost unthinkable, eating what other predators had already killed and abandoned. A lion or a pack of hyenas will strip a carcass of meat and move on, leaving behind skin, connective tissue, and bone. To a starving human, that leftover carcass wasn't waste. It was the only meal left on the entire landscape, which brings us to one of the strangest, darkest survival tools our ancestors ever developed: the ability to crack open bone. Marrow, the soft, fatty tissue packed inside animal bones, survives long after the meat around it is gone. It's dense in calories, rich in fat, and almost completely ignored by most other predators, who don't have the tools or patience to break through bone. Humans did. A rock, brought down hard and precisely, could split a femur that a lion's jaw couldn't touch. Some researchers argue this ability, turning scavenged bone into a real food source, may have been one of the reasons our ancestors survived environments that should have starved them out entirely. It wasn't hunting, it was out scavenging the scavengers. And when even the marrow was gone, some groups went a step further, boiling the bones themselves, along with hide and connective tissue, down into a thin, fat-laced broth, extracting the last usable calories from a carcass that every other animal on the landscape had already decided was worthless. Here's the part most retellings of this story leave out. In the most extreme, prolonged famines, humans, not just in prehistory, but documented in written history too. From besieged cities to failed Arctic expeditions to isolated groups cut off by disaster, some humans crossed a line beyond scavenging animal remains entirely. Historical and archaeological records from multiple documented famine events describe humans eating other humans, almost always the already dead, as an absolute last resort when every other option had been exhausted. This isn't included for shock. It's included because it's the clearest possible evidence of exactly how far the human survival instinct will push a person once every other option is gone, and how many people, faced with certain death, chose survival even at that cost. It's also notably rare. The overwhelming majority of starving humans throughout history did not do this. Most died first or found some other way through. That restraint, under conditions that extreme, says as much about us as the exceptions do. For all the individual, brutal ingenuity, the cracked bones, the boiled hides, the trial and error knowledge of which root wouldn't kill you, the single biggest reason our species made it through repeated famine wasn't any one technique. It was cooperation. Archaeologists have traced tools and materials hundreds of miles from where they originated, evidence that even isolated, struggling groups stayed connected to others. Those connections carried more than objects. They carried warning, knowledge, and sometimes food itself, one group sharing with another that had nothing left. In a world where hunger was the default condition, helping a stranger wasn't generosity. It was a survival strategy, and quite possibly the single most effective one our species ever developed. Put together, this isn't really a story about how clever our ancestors were. It's a story about how far the human body and mind will go before giving up. Cracking bone that predators couldn't touch, eating insects most of us would refuse today, learning which roots were safe by watching who didn't survive eating them, and in the very worst moments, making choices no one should ever have to make. Tonight, when you finish a meal and think nothing of the food left on your plate, remember what food used to mean. It wasn't a choice, it was whatever was left before something else got to it first. And the only reason any of us are here to complain about being a little hungry before dinner is that generation after generation, they refused to stop looking for the next meal.